Henry Fonda, Mr. Cohen, you cut yourself off by leading into the commercial.
He spent decades building one of the most trusted faces in Hollywood, a face audiences believed in, a face that symbolized morality, justice, and the American conscience itself. And then, in a single opening scene, Henry Fonda destroyed it all. When audiences sat down to watch Once Upon a Time in the West in 1968, they expected comfort, they expected the familiar, they expected Henry Fonda to be the man who would eventually do the right thing. What they got instead was silence, cold eyes, a slow, deliberate walk toward violence, no heroic speech, no moral struggle, just evil, calm, controlled, and unmistakable. That single scene shocked audiences so deeply that some never forgave him. Friends turned away, studios hesitated, and for the first time in his long career, Henry Fonda wondered if he had gone too far, because this wasn't just another role. It was a betrayal of everything people thought he was. And as Fonda himself later admitted, this choice nearly cost him everything he had spent a lifetime building. But to understand why this moment was so dangerous, so personal, and so irreversible, we need to go back to where Henry Fonda came from. Long before Hollywood, long before fame, before he ever became the man America trusted. Henry Fonda was born Henry James Fonda on May 16, 1905, in Grand Island, Nebraska. There was nothing glamorous about his beginnings, no spotlights, no red carpets, no hint that this quiet Midwestern boy would one day become the moral backbone of American cinema. He grew up far removed from Hollywood fantasy, in a world shaped by discipline, restraint, and responsibility. His father was a successful printer, respected in the community, firm in his values. His household was conservative, structured, and emotionally reserved. But beneath that orderly surface, tragedy struck early. When Henry was still young, his mother died suddenly, an event that left a deep and permanent mark on him. He rarely spoke about it, but those who knew him understood that the loss pushed him inward. He became introspective, observant, emotionally guarded. That quiet gravity would later become one of his greatest strengths on screen. Fonda did not grow up dreaming of fame. In fact, acting was never part of the plan. As a young man, he studied journalism, believing his future lay in words on a page, not in front of an audience. But fate intervened almost by accident when he attended a local stage production in Omaha. Something about the theater unsettled him. It stirred emotions he had never fully allowed himself to feel. Soon after, he became involved with the Omaha Community Playhouse. It was there that Henry Fonda first stepped onto a stage, unsure, awkward, but unmistakably real. More importantly, it was there that he met another young man chasing the same uncertain dream, a shy, soft-spoken actor named James Stewart. The two formed a bond that would last a lifetime. Together, they moved to New York in the early 1930s, sharing a small apartment, struggling side by side through auditions, rejections, and the harsh realities of the Great Depression. They were broke, they were overlooked, but they were determined. Those years of hardship shaped Henry Fonda profoundly. They taught him patience, they taught him humility, and above all, they taught him discipline. Even before fame arrived, Henry Fonda was becoming the man audiences would one day trust completely. A man of restraint, a man of quiet strength, a man whose authority did not come from volume, but from conviction. And it was only a matter of time before Broadway and then Hollywood took notice. Broadway was where Henry Fonda first began to stand out. He didn't have the loud charisma that dominated the era. He wasn't flamboyant. He didn't try to overwhelm a room. Instead, he carried something rarer, a lean physical presence, a clear, measured diction, and a natural authority that felt honest, almost unavoidable. It was the kind of presence that didn't beg for attention. It commanded it. Hollywood noticed. By the mid-1930s, Fonda transitioned into film, bringing with him that same grounded realism that made him so striking on stage. While other actors relied on charm and theatrical style, Fonda felt like a real man caught inside real moral problems. And then came the role that would define him forever. In 1940, Henry Fonda played Tom Joad in The Grapes of Wrath. This wasn't just a performance, it was a statement. As the weary but unbroken migrant worker, Fonda carried the pain of ordinary people through one of America's darkest periods. He conveyed dignity without bragging, moral outrage without shouting, quiet resilience that hit harder than any dramatic breakdown. The role earned him an Academy Award nomination. But more than that, it sealed his identity in the eyes of the public. Henry Fonda became the embodiment of the American conscience. From there, the pattern only deepened. Throughout the 1940s and 1950s, he built a body of work shaped by justice, responsibility, and ethical courage. Films like Young Mr. Lincoln, My Darling Clementine, and The Oxbow Incident proved that Fonda could project a strength without bravado and authority without arrogance. When he portrayed Abraham Lincoln, he didn't make him grand or untouchable. He emphasized humility, moral clarity, the human weight of leadership. And then came one of the most famous roles of his career, Juror number 8 in 12 Angry Men. There, Fonda reached his purest form of restraint. He didn't dominate with power. He used calm reason and quiet conviction to challenge prejudice and apathy. It remains one of the finest examples of subtle, principle-driven acting in film history. By this point, Henry Fonda wasn't just a star. He was a symbol. Audiences didn't merely watch him, they trusted him. And that trust became his greatest asset. And later, the very thing he would risk destroying. Because just as his career reached its peak of respect, the world changed, war arrived, and Henry Fonda did something most Hollywood legends never did. Henry Fonda's career should have kept climbing uninterrupted. He had fame, respect, a reputation built on integrity. But then World War II pulled the world into darkness. And unlike many celebrities who stayed safely stateside, Henry Fonda enlisted in the United States Navy. It wasn't for publicity, it wasn't for show, it was duty. He served with distinction, participating in active duty, including combat operations. This was not a man playing courage on a screen. This was a man living it. His service earned him the Bronze Star, and when he returned to Hollywood, something had changed. The same restraint was still there, the same controlled voice, the same calm authority, but now it carried heavier weight, the kind of weight that comes from seeing the cost of freedom firsthand. He carried himself with greater seriousness, and his performances reflected it. Henry Fonda was still trusted, still admired, but inside, the man was evolving. Because a lifetime of being seen as the honorable American hero can become a prison, a golden cage built from the public's expectations. And slowly, the question began to form. What happens when the man everyone calls good wants to step into darkness? What happens when the actor known for moral clarity decides he wants to terrify the audience instead? For decades, Fonda had cultivated a persona that the studios depended on, the honorable, dependable American man. Fans didn't just like him, they needed him to remain that symbol. And yet, he was not afraid to challenge his own image, because deep down, the desire to prove himself as an artist was still burning. Then, in 1968, a director with a bold vision offered him a role no one expected him to touch, a role that would flip his legacy inside out, a role that would shock the world before he even said a word. In 1968, Sergio Leone was crafting what would become a masterpiece, Once Upon a Time in the West, a Western unlike the classic American versions. This was not a story of clean heroes and clear justice. This was a world of dust, silence, greed, and death, and the center of one of the most unforgettable opening scenes in cinema history. Henry Fonda. Fonda played Frank, a cold-blooded, ruthless killer, a villain, a man devoid of empathy, driven only by greed and the pursuit of power. It was the most shocking departure of his career. For years, audiences had known him as the upright hero, morally infallible, the face you trusted to do what was right. He had been typecast as the all-American good man, and now he was stepping into uncharted territory. Fonda later admitted he knew exactly what would happen. He recalled in interviews that he understood people would hate him for it. They were used to seeing him as the good guy, but he wanted to prove he could scare them. He wanted to prove he could be anyone. This wasn't a safe career move. It wasn't a studio-approved reinvention. It was a bold, artistic gamble, and it nearly cost him everything he had built. Fonda's transformation for the role was meticulous. He studied Leone's previous work and immersed himself in Frank's psychology. Frank was evil, plain, and simple. Fonda wanted the audience to feel that evil in every glance, every step, every moment of a stillness. He spent hours perfecting how Frank would move across a room, how he would stand, how he would draw his gun. He aimed to make evil seem almost elegant, terrifying, because it was calm. And then came the opening scene. It has become legendary for a reason. Fonda arrives slowly at a desolate train station. His movements are measured, unnervingly controlled. The camera lingers on his face, expressionless, cold, yet dominating the entire frame even without speaking. Leone framed him in wide, empty shots that made the landscape feel like a graveyard, and the haunting score magnified every subtle shift in posture, every piercing glance. Fonda later reflected that during the filming of that first scene, he remembered thinking something like this: if he could make the audience squirm in their seats before he even raised a gun, then he had done his job. And he did, because the power of that scene wasn't violence, it was dread. The feeling that the man you trusted had become the thing you feared. But the moment audiences realized what Henry Fonda was doing, the consequences began. The reaction was immediate. For decades, Henry Fonda had been Hollywood's moral anchor, the dependable face, the man audiences believed in without question. And now, they didn't know what to do with him. Some viewers were stunned, others were unsettled, and many felt betrayed. Fonda later admitted that the backlash was real and painful. He lost friends in Hollywood, people who could no longer separate the man from the monster he played on screen. Some directors refused to work with him, not because he wasn't brilliant, but because they were afraid that audiences would no longer see Henry Fonda. They would only see Frank. In Europe, critics praised the performance. They recognized it as fearless and revolutionary. But in America, the reaction was colder. Audiences struggled to reconcile the Henry Fonda they had admired for decades with the calm, calculating killer they had just witnessed. The confusion cut deep. For a while, Fonda genuinely believed he might have damaged his career beyond repair. He later described the experience as both liberating and terrifying. He had risked his reputation, and for a time he thought he might lose it entirely, but something else happened too. By stepping into moral darkness, Fonda reshaped the Western genre itself. Until then, Westerns were built on clear heroes and villains. Right and wrong were easy to identify. Fonda's Frank changed that. By playing against type, he helped usher in an era of moral ambiguity. Characters became more complex, more human, more dangerous. Sergio Leone himself credited Fonda with elevating the entire film. He said Henry brought a darkness the script alone could not convey, that he made Frank unforgettable. And that was the paradox. The role that frightened studios, the role that cost him friends, the role that nearly destroyed his carefully built image, also became one of the most respected performances of his career. Looking back, Fonda admitted the price was high. It cost him the comfort of being the nice guy everyone trusted. It cost him peace of mind for a while, but it gave him something he had never experienced before: freedom, the thrill of transformation, the joy of making audiences forget who he was and only see who Frank was. And for an actor of his integrity, that thrill was worth every risk. But Henry Fonda's story didn't end there. In the later years of his life, something unexpected happened. A final chapter, a moment of reckoning, and a long overdue reward. After decades of carrying Hollywood's moral weight, after risking his reputation to prove he could walk into darkness, Henry Fonda entered his later years facing something no role could protect him from. Time. Age began to narrow the world around him, but it also gave his performances something deeper, a sense of lived regret, of unspoken history behind every pause, of emotions held back for so long they became more powerful than any speech. And then came the career renaissance. In 1981, Henry Fonda starred in On Golden Pond opposite Katharine Hepburn and his own daughter, Jane Fonda. This wasn't just another film, it felt personal, a story about aging, regret, and reconciliation, a story where the silence between characters carried as much meaning as the words. Fonda's performance was quietly devastating. By that time, he was physically frail, but his presence remained commanding. His voice and eyes carried decades of unspoken emotion, the kind you can't fake and can't teach. It was the weight of a lifetime coming through in the smallest moments. And at last, Hollywood did what it had waited far too long to do. That role earned Henry Fonda his first and only Academy Award for Best Actor. Many saw it as overdue recognition, not just for one performance, but for an entire lifetime of excellence. It was a moment that felt like closure. A man who had spent decades portraying integrity, justice, restraint, and moral courage was finally honored for the very qualities that made him unforgettable. But behind that legendary career was another story, rarely as polished as the characters he played, because Henry Fonda's personal life carried its own turbulence. And in many ways, it was almost as dramatic as the roles that made him famous. Behind the image of discipline and moral clarity, Henry Fonda's personal life was far more complicated. Over the course of his life, he married 5 times. Each marriage reflected a different chapter of his journey, both as a man and as an artist. His first marriage came in 1931, when he wed actress Margaret Sullivan. They were young, talented, and surrounded by the promise of early Hollywood. But the union was brief, ending in divorce just 2 years later. In 1936, Fonda married Frances Ford Seymour Brokaw. This relationship appeared more stable, and together they had 2 children, Jane and Peter Fonda. Both would go on to become major figures in Hollywood themselves, inheriting their father's talent and intensity, but behind closed doors, the marriage struggled under emotional strain and the pressures of fame. After 13 years, the relationship ended in 1949. In 1950, Fonda married Susan Blanchard, who was just 21 years old at the time. During this marriage, they adopted a daughter, Amy Fishman. Yet once again, stability proved elusive, and the marriage ended within 3 years. In 1957, he married Italian Baroness Afdera Franchetti. She brought glamour, sophistication, and a European elegance into his life. But despite the allure, the marriage lasted only 4 years, ending in 1961. Finally, in 1965, Henry Fonda married Shirley May Adams. This marriage would endure until his death. Lasting 17 years, it offered him the companionship and steadiness that had escaped him for much of his life. It became his longest and most enduring relationship. Through all of this, Fonda remained intensely private. He was not a man who spoke easily about emotions, not with the press, often not even with those closest to him. That emotional reserve, so powerful on screen, sometimes created distance in real life. Yet those who truly knew him understood something important. Henry Fonda was not cold, he was controlled. He carried his feelings inward, shaping them into performances instead of confessions. And as his life neared its final chapter, that quiet strength never left him. Because even in decline, Henry Fonda remained exactly who he had always been: dignified, reserved, uncompromising in his integrity. In the end, the role that once caused fear and backlash didn't destroy Henry Fonda. Time reshaped it. What confused American audiences in the beginning gradually became something else entirely: a legend, a benchmark, a performance people now speak about with reverence. That opening scene in Once Upon a Time in the West is no longer viewed as a betrayal of his image. It's viewed as courage, because Henry Fonda didn't just play Frank, he dismantled the very idea that he had to stay safe for the audience. And when he looked back on it later in life, he didn't deny the cost. He admitted it took something from him: the comfort of being the nice guy everyone trusted, the ease of walking into rooms where everyone already knew who he was supposed to be. For a while he carried that weight, but he also admitted it gave him something he had never truly felt before: freedom, the thrill of transformation, the satisfaction of knowing he could step into the unknown, terrify the world, and still remain an artist with integrity. He paid a price, but the work was worth it, and while his public legacy grew even stronger with time, his private life continued quietly toward its end. Henry Fonda passed away on August 12, 1982, at his home in Los Angeles. The cause was heart disease. His wife Shirley was there, along with his children, Jane and Peter. Though he'd also been battling prostate cancer, it was not the cause of his death. It was listed only as a concurrent condition on his death certificate. Even in his final chapter, those closest to him said he remained dignified and private, embodying the same quiet strength that defined his life and his career. His death marked the end of an era, but his work didn't fade, because Henry Fonda left behind something stronger than fame: a legacy of performances built on moral weight, restraint, and truth, and one unforgettable moment in a Western opening scene where the most trusted man in Hollywood became the face of evil, calmly, silently, and completely. That choice once cost him everything, but history did something unexpected. It turned that risk into a monument,